Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome back to the Social Pillar podcast, the Social Pillar show, the Social Pillar live stream, whatever you want to call it. How are we? Good
Social
evening.
pillar archival footage that you're watching in 2000 years and trying to figure out what it was we were doing
What
back
is
in the
it?
old
I hope
days.
so.
Who is
I
it?
hope the
Who are we and what are
culture.
we doing?
Yeah, I hope the culture of role playing games is so alive in 2000 years. It's like the core tenet. It's the reason that society still exists or something. But
Yes,
alas, we're here.
I
mean,
completely agree.
we could be the source of a cult. There could be an entire religion that is formed around us. And
I like that
given
too.
how I'm coming through on the stream, I am not haunted, everyone. I guarantee I really am more than just
No
a
more
couple
than
of
usual.
pixels. No more than usual. But yes, apparently I'm pixelated this evening. I do apologise. I think that is my end. I have terrible internet.
So,
Well, as we get haunted by the ghost of Thea, just from the other side over here. For those of you who don't know who we are, welcome to the Social Pillar. We are an ongoing conversation about the value of role-playing games and their crafts, cultures, and communities in our world. We'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we are coming from. We're paying our respects to elders past and present, and extend our respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are watching or listening. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land, and sovereignty was never ceded. My
100%.
introduction. I'm Ian Zammett. I'm from Roleplay Experience. We are 3 forever GMs. My experience is from over 30 years of role playing with Dungeons and Dragons, Cyberpunk, Shadowrun, Mage, you name it, a whole bunch of games. And now running professional games for people just to be able to engage teams. And hopefully people starting to learn how to communicate together better. With me and my 2 colleagues of such lethal cunning, I have Jared, first of all.
I love
Would you like
that.
to
Lethal cunning. I'm going to think of my brain as a weapon of cunning now. Good
A
evening.
weapon of
I may have borrowed that from another podcast, but I'll
I
see
love
anyway.
that. Well, I stole.
cunning is a cunning thing.
Yes.
Beautiful. Welcome, one and all friends and foes, as I like to use instead of ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Social Pillar. My name is
I hate
Jared,
it.
also known as the GM Chef. If you are tuning in, I will say that currently Jasper's Game Week Australia is currently underway. If you're listening to this after the fact and you're not sure what that is, it is a charity live stream designed, curated, and organized by Meeples and Dragons in order to support Jasper's Game Day, which is a charity from America, and it started based on a desire to raise money and awareness for suicide prevention. So this is something very, very close to me. I was in a game last night hosted by Scarlet Moth, so thank you so much for that insane shenanigans. And if you want to catch some games and you're listening to this not after the fact or too late, Saturday this weekend I will be running my own game, and we're doing a riff on a classic fairy tale. So if you want to tune in, come check that out. But yeah, for tonight, we're going to talk about some cool stuff. As usual, Thea, how are you?
I am very well, and hopefully getting less pixelated
By the second.
the second. Yes. I'm also known as OMGM. I do stream my own games, but have taken a month off recently. I will be back. Not in a terrifying Terminator way, but in a warm, supportive way, as all GMs are, to help everybody really actualize their own personal dreams and journeys. As always, it is a pleasure to be hanging out with you 2 wonderful human beings.
Back at you.
What are we doing tonight?
Right, back at you. Good question for tonight. So for all of you out there, we would love to hear you in the chat as well when we talk a bit about this. So please share your thoughts, questions, etc. We'd love to hear from you and chat with you. Tonight, after last week, we talked a bit about world building and the whole sense of lore about what GMs pull together to try and help create story. So we're going to delve into something even more broad as a topic, and it probably actually is the heart for me for role playing, and that's story itself. What are the elements of building stories within tabletop role playing games? The good question about this is why is it so important to role-playing games? I had a simple answer for this. If you want to have a look around, say Dungeons and Dragons, in the very first line of the Dungeons and Dragons Player's Handbook, it states the Dungeons and Dragons role-playing game is about storytelling in worlds of swords and sorcery. And in the introduction to the Dungeon Master's Guide for D&D, it says, the DMs create world for the players to explore and also creates and runs adventures that drive the story. So it's at the heart of this. I love telling stories. I love being part of tabletop role-playing group stories being created, because it's not actually just the GM creating it. It comes to life and it becomes something more when the players are engaged and encouraged to be creative and build on the story that's being told, that may have leapt up from ideas the GM has, but more increasingly as well with session zeros, this is a group effort that comes together and we get to build. Before we dive into the tabletop role-playing game side of it, we're going to talk about what are stories, first of all, and why we love it, why this. For my own experience, and I'd love to throw to you guys in a second, I can be driven to tears or sadness with, or tears of joy with a well-told story. I can be driven to protest or the rights of the downtrodden. I can be left bereft by the poor choices of a lead character in a tragedy. Or you can laugh uproariously at the events in a hilarious comedy. But what's something that's really awesome about stories beyond the emotional engagement and that you get to share this with other people, they also make it easy to learn things when you hear stories. Due to their elements of uniqueness, it links you into things. It links you into particular ways of doing things. And if you get to hear it more than once because you enjoy it, that repetition helps you learn things as well. So it's kind of fascinating for that. Why do you guys love stories?
Oof. I think the lessons and the morals for me. I think at the end of the day, I don't know where I picked this up and I don't really know if it's true, but there's a bookstore somewhere called Seven Stories. And it's this like multiple story, pardon the pun, bookstore. It's this very, very extravagant bookstore. And it was called that because it is said that there are only 7 true stories and there's just so many different ways of telling it. And I've never really dived into that, but it's always stuck with me. And I think at the end of the day, yeah, there might be 7 like true morals or things like that, but every story is going to have potentially exactly what you've touched on, Ian. There's tragedy and comedy and all of these other genres and themes, and we can always dive into that. But at the end of the day, there can be lessons learned from comedy and there can be lessons learned from tragedy, and we can all go from there. So for me, it's definitely about lessons and morals and growth.
Yeah. And I think for me, it's very similar in that stories is how we remember. And I mean that in terms of, yes, we have history, but if you think back, what do you remember about history? I don't remember the dates that, the fall of Rome. I don't remember the dates of Great Chinese Fleet sailing the seas, but I remember the stories.
Yeah.
And I think because it ties into us, that meaning that you were touching on, Jared, is that we know what happened in the past and can learn from what happened in the past because there are stories told about it. And if the stories aren't told, it may as well have never happened. People talk about, history is written by the victors. History is written by the history writers. Look at ancient Greece. A lot of the stories we know, or a lot of the history that we know is down to 3 or 4 sources, because they told a good story and this good story was preserved throughout history. I'm sure there were very dry historians of the time recording census data and recording how many bushels of grain and how much barley went into beer.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there was someone who wrote down the recipe for Roman concrete. Wasn't interesting, wasn't a story.
Yeah.
All of that is lost.
Yeah, I think we've recently refound the recipe for Roman concrete, apparently.
We have. They believe they have.
Believe so. For those of you unfamiliar, it is a concrete that reinforces itself, and the way they believe it, like Romans apparently created it, and we haven't figured it out yet. They believe that it is a self-healing, and what we think it is, I think it's the addition of lime or something adjacent.
Yeah, they were talking about the kind of lime.
Dissolves it and then it'll like reform crystals in cracks and crevices in the material, which is fascinating.
That is awesome.
But that's the story.
Well, there's the story, right?
And that's the story. It's the story of how this concrete heals itself.
True. I mean, is that really what a story is? Is it a statement of facts and events that have happened over a period of time, and the ones that we remember were either so significant or so well told that there was an emotional tie-in. Because for me, again, like the stories and the lessons and everything,
Yeah.
if there's an emotional tie-in, you're obviously going to remember one story more memorably than another. If it hits home, if it resonates with your particular journey or things that you're dealing with at any particular time, there's going to be things and obviously mediums. You can tell a very similar story in different mediums that are going to hit two different personalities as well. So
Well,
Completely.
interesting you should say that, actually, because one of what I wanted to talk about, and I may be cutting short some of our pre-chat, but I wanted to talk about story structure. And I would argue that even a simple story of a concrete that was able to heal itself and its source and recipe was lost to history, and we've just rediscovered that, actually follows a story structure. We
it
have
tracks.
something happens. There's an occurrence. There is a crisis.
And there's evolution
There
and there's
is
change.
There is evolution.
Right.
And there's a potential revolution. Maybe there's a revolution. There is a resolution.
Concrete rise.
Or concrete rises. There's a resolution or there's a cliffhanger. And that's a story. That is a story structure. And I think there is something universal about stories that makes them stories. I don't think a story has to be something that is recorded in a book and follows a structure, but I think the way that we remember things tends to put things into a story structure.
Yeah,
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's like I think it's good that we're going to talk about why we love stories in particular, but but also the fact that you started bringing up structure, which is where we're going to head to tonight, because story itself, we can talk about, some of that we love. But I love what you both said about emotion, how much you remember the stories that really emotionally connect with you. And I find that the stories that I most love connect with me especially the stories that you feel are your most favorite ones, connect on multiple levels, and it's very much about many parts of the human experience start to really resonate for you in stories. I'll speak for myself here, and I'd love to know about your journeys, because for me as a games master, this is an addition to my work in other fields regarding stories. So in performing arts in particular, as a theatre director, as a performer, as a writer, and as a storyteller, which I'm so happy I got to do as part of university in the UK, to be able to understand structure of stories. Why do some stories work? Why are there familiar themes? How to tell these? How to be able to go from here to then hook people in with a particular point to then bring it to another point? It comes down to there are certain things, milestones along the way that you can hit to tell a certain story. And there are some, maybe not universal necessarily to every story, but there are some very common things and different structures that can be used. And we could talk about so many topics about storytelling, so that's probably for other
times.
other
we'll
times
dive,
as well.
we'll dive
Story
into
for another time.
I think
we'll dive into all the facets and aspects, I think, at some point or another. But
absolutely.
But I think that first one about structure, I think, is where we're going to start for tonight. And Thea, you had in particular wanted to talk about one structure that is very common.
Yes. So I wanted to have a chat about the general structure of a lot of stories. Now, I come at the arts more from a film story writing type of thing, like purely here is a thing that is written, no one is going to perform this. But that's kind of where I'm coming from. And a lot of when you are building a story, writing a script, it's taught. It'd be good if I could put a sentence together, let alone talk about story structure. But let's just support
Give it a go.
See how we go.
crackle.
But we talk about the 3-act structure, and as Ian was alluding to, this is a really common approach to how you can structure a story. And some people would say how you should structure a story. I always shy away from should do this. I don't believe there is any correct way to express or be creative.
No.
However, structures are really useful when you're feeling a bit lost or a bit uncertain. And I really like the 3-act structure. So when I'm doing scripts or stories, even if I'm not planning to it, I've got that in the back of my mind. But what I wanted to talk about tonight and why we agreed that this would be a good thing to chat about is how it could be applied to gaming. And as you guys know, I do a lot of one-shots. So I want to talk about 3-act structure, what it is, but also then how I apply that to gaming and how that in my games in particular.
Love it.
So we keep using this term. So I'm going to very quickly talk about what is a 3-act structure. It's when the title card comes up and says Act 1, and then there's Act 2, and then there's Act 3.
Perfect.
The end. Yeah, I know.
I've seen that.
Yeah, I know. In the 3-act structure, it really talks about certain things that happen in that's about equal thirds, but they don't have to be time-wise equal. Act 1 is kind of where things are starting to happen. You're establishing the stories, the backstories. You're establishing the situation, the environment, the world, for example. Sometimes called in the exposition phase or the inciting stage, the setup. I have words. Look at me cooking notes.
Perfect.
But the setup stage. And in that kind of 3-act structure, we talk about rising action, and that is where things are starting to happen. And while you can violate this and still have a good story, I think for a game, this is where you're starting to set up the world. This is where you're starting to set up the characters. And all of that rises up towards what can be often called the inciting incident. What kicks off all of this? The princess has been kidnapped. The prince has been kidnapped. The princess is actually the knight and the dragon and all of them that is going, but no one knows that yet. It's being set up. The MacGuffin goes missing. The people hear about the world is ending. Something happens. And that's kind of, the tension builds to that point. In Act 1, you'd also kind of often will talk about you want to have a key plot point. So something significant is happening to your story. Now, for me, I like to, when I'm thinking about building a structure for a game, for a one-shot, I want to think that, I want to set up my story, my characters, but I want something that's going to hook them in. So kind of I like to call that first plot point my plot hook. And it's going to grab them in. It's going to make them want to do the mission. Or, like a lot of players, they'll want to do something else. So don't be too wedded to this. But you've got that plot point. And that's kind of your setup. And the action, there's kind of like a lull in the action there. Your next one, your Act 2, this is your kind of the confrontation or the conflict where things are starting to go wrong. Again, if you've got a lull in action or in tension, it's a good way to think about this is where there's rising action and it's moving up to that kind of midpoint of the story, also known as kind of the crisis, where, the Death Star has destroyed Alderaan, the rebels are on the moon and they just don't know what's going to happen next. It's really where you rise to that crisis, and sometimes it's called the confrontation or the crisis stage. In your kind of Act 2, I like to have something else significant, so kind of plot point 2 happens around there. A significant event, a significant encounter, something is found, something is lost. And then in Act 3, this is where you have your climax and your resolution. Feels weird saying climax online. I don't know why. Society has attached meaning to words and I don't like it.
God damn it. English language.
But really, it's where that you get that rising action again. And often I've seen it drawn or described as kind of like these progressively higher waves, where in Act 1, your tension rises and then comes down a little bit. And then moving into Act 2, your confrontation, action rises or tension rises and then settles down a little bit. But it doesn't go much below that level of the highest point of Act 1.
Like a plateau. It plateaus and it plateaus.
Yeah, kind of plateaus a little.
Yeah.
And then into your kind of your climax, your climatic event, you've got it rises up again, and in your resolution, then things are resolved. The princess discovers it's all a case of mistaken identity, and there was never anyone kidnapped in the first place. It was just society's preconceptions of what should and shouldn't be. The revolution comes about. And then you've got your resolution. And you're singing empty chairs and empty tables. It's where the tension settles back down. And whether things are resolved for good or ill, things are kind of tied up. When I'm looking at toning that into a game or applying that to games, when I try to plan, I kind of have my setup. I want the plot hook. So something happens. In that confrontation phase, that's usually where I'll plan my major puzzle and my major conflict or combat. Not everybody wants combat, and anyone who was lucky enough to see Jared playing Jasper's game last night will know there wasn't a huge conflict.
No,
But there were
and it was
things that were happening. There
spectacular.
was rising
Yeah, there was
tension.
absolutely. It was spectacular.
Yeah. And then that final climactic moment doesn't necessarily, for me, need to be a combat. To me, that is where you get a key moment for one or more of your players and their characters. So it could be that, and I'm just thinking back to some games that I've run, that one of the PCs has been killed by the other group and they're having a post-death, after-death, other plane experience. It could be that there is mortal peril for some of the PCs and one of the party is offered a choice, whether they sacrifice part of their eternal soul and take on a patron, take a level in Warlock. And that's how they resolve, and they have to make that sacrifice, which I had happen in a recent game. But it's that real kind of climatic moment that doesn't have to be conflict to me. And then resolution. And for that kind of one shot, that's how I tend to plan. But it's not just something that I think needs to happen in one shots. I think it is something that can happen across multiple games and in campaigns. And there's something that we're not going to talk too much about, which is like a 5-act structure. And it actually adds a little bit. It adds and I'm going to say this incorrectly, kind of like a denouement at the end. So after the resolution, things are kind of tied up and it's Perot standing in the room saying, and this person did this and this person did that. It's after the, what is it in Glass Onion, where you'd find out everything and it starts getting turned up. But I think for campaigns, that's when you start to look at, setting up the next part, setting up where are they going to go. So I think you can have 3 acts within a single game, or if it's a campaign, I think you can have it within a single session. And you can also have it as overarching. And I think for game masters, particularly starting out, that can be a way of planning. Obviously, your players are going to do random things and go in random directions and make friends with the hat seller. But I think this is a way of allowing all of that to happen, but not getting lost, because you always have a sense of where you're going. That's how I use that kind of 3-act structure.
Yeah, I love it. It gives you
guys?
bearing. Yeah, it gives you bearings. You know, like for those unfamiliar with either like, you know, actual navigation or map use and compass use, you generally set a bearing. You have a general direction and you get there eventually. So like a ship doesn't sail dead straight. You have to use the wind to kind of go this way and that way. And when you're walking through a forest, you're going to you're going to check your bearing, you're going to check your heading, which is where you're headed versus where your landmark is. And you choose a landmark, you go there, you check where you're going, and you go again. And your ultimate destination is the goal, but you're not going to go there in a straight line. And I just love that you can apply that on the microcosm and the macrocosm of role-playing games and campaigns, for sure.
Yeah, do you apply that kind of idea, the 3 acts as well, Jared, for your gaming, or when you're thinking of a session?
Loosely, but obviously, like, I loved just actually listening to that theory and going, right, okay, have I done that with it? Because I'm very aware that with my current campaign, I'm definitely into Act 2. It's been lots of introduction, getting to know the characters, setting up. And I think I didn't interrupt you because I think like that first act is establishing context. So with a lot of like D&D stuff, like last night, I could sit down because I knew I was playing D&D with all of that terminology, with all of that culture. And at the end of the day, we were not doing a traditional and what you should do with role playing. We did a twist on Eurovision. We did this theatrical thing where we were all of these components and things in that. And there wasn't a traditional challenge. There was a threat on the show and things like that. But we didn't know where that was going to go or how that was going to come about. We just understood that it was the normal sort of thing that was going to happen. There was going to be some complication at some point. Yeah. And like you also said, the time structure of like, I feel like if you're going to say, guys, we're going to sit down and play D&D, like you said, Ian, in the Dungeon Master's Guide, a Dungeon Master does this and he sets up a story and a context and a thing like that in a sword and sorcery universe. So if we've done a good session 0 and we've established all of that, I can throw someone in the action and I can say, right, you're suddenly on an airship and all of this is happening and there's fireballs and all sorts of things. No one's going to be confused. And then we've quickly, potentially skipped to, holy moly, we know what the complication is, we know what the consequences are, and we know where we need to go. So you could skip a lot of Act 1, but I like that you still need to do that. You need to block it in. So I feel like I am, but not necessarily consciously. And I don't I haven't I'm aware of it as a storytelling method and structure, but I wouldn't say that I'm applying it. I'm just aware of where my game's at throughout it. So again, it's kind of like you know where to go, but you're just checking in and going, oh, I'm here now on the map.
I think
In a way.
I think it's an interesting point that you bring up, that it's not a conscious thing that you do, because I feel that this kind of approach has permeated so much of storytelling.
Yeah.
I may or may not have sat down and had to analyze a whole bunch of different things at different stages, but it does tend to break down. And I don't know if that is an instinctive thing about the way that our brains construct meaning, but we do tend to have a thing, a crisis, a resolution. But I loved how you sort of said that.
Yeah, and I mean, this is also coming from someone who has the most insane structured sort of, it's probably not the most insane, but from someone who does love systems and structure and templates and modules and things that you can fill out. I feel like it is kind of like we've said, it is this broad stroke thing, and you can do 3 strokes or 3 acts, but you can also do 5 acts, and you can take
multiple acts.
What works for you, and like you said, the timing is also not necessarily equal. I feel like the value of each section has to have its own weight. Whether you're setting up that context in a session 0, and then your session, your one shot, for example, could be all of 2 and 3. And you've said to them, all right, guys, we're going to do this. Yeah, well, that's it. Is if you're coming immediately in with conflict and then resolution, perhaps that's just a 2-act thing. So we chop and change, and we don't have to stick into anything.
Yeah, I love how you both talked about this, that there's a sort of instinct to it that not necessarily it's a 3-act structure is something you set down to do. But I've been fascinated by this because also you both said that it's something that feels like it is common. We're so influenced by a lot of our media out there, of course, it has a lot of 3-act structure based in there. We may have taken it on, but I'm very interested to see if, because we've played games for a long time and run games for a long time, have we instinctively started to find that and start to apply it because we've noticed this is what actually people respond to, or this is how we go
first. I want to just quickly draw back to how we were so beautifully sort of, I think before we actually went live, is storytelling is, again, like it's a recollection of events, and it's this historical thing, and it's this, that's important value. And I feel like, cultures of old, you'd go out and hunt all day, you'd come back, and what would you do? Well, you'd tell everyone what you did. You'd tell them all the challenges and the things, and it's like, okay, well, I value what you've gone through, and I want to make sure that I hold that dear and that I value and appreciate your journey. And we will obviously talk about the hero's journey as we plan to. But common storytelling and all of that. And maybe that's what came first, right? Is sitting around the fire and saying, all right, we went out, Act 1. We found the buffalo that we were going to hunt. But there was also a lion hunting that buffalo. So we had to overcome that challenge, and we did. And then the resolution was obviously bringing it home, kind of a thing. So,
You're absolutely right, because stories came first. I think if you look at when people have started becoming academic and doing being analytical around stories, that's where this came from. And I think it's very interesting when you look at the academic literature around this, and I know, Ian, you've got very familiar with this as well. The discussion was around what is the structure of stories, and they looked back at everything. And that it's a pattern that emerged in that this is how things tended to be structured, and this was how things that worked or things that lasted tended to be structured. It's also how we
interpret it, right? Because communication being the core of all of this, right? If we just strip it right down, it is communication. It is the sending of a message and the interpretation of a message. And if we have found something that naturally works, as you said, Ian, so beautifully, for the human experience, if we can not only understand what is being communicated to us in a structured format that our brains interpret and understand, but also we feel and reflect and emulate and kind of use our mirror neurons to go, right, I can totally understand. Because if you're you're the family at home, and you've just your lead hunter's just told you this epic story, there's a part of you that's your adrenaline's rising, you're pumping, and you've gone, oh my goodness, what a way to be. there's
Yeah.
something really, really homing and true about
Yeah.
that at our core. So, yes,
Yeah.
we love to actually see and hear and feel what has happened, not necessarily to us, but to the
Yeah.
community of humans
Everyone
as
To
a
else.
whole.
others. Isn't that
Yeah.
fascinating that we actually can emotionally resonate from somebody else's experience, that we can have our heart pumping as they're describing how, like, I love the hunters coming home and telling their story of what they faced, and they prepared, but it wasn't everything they prepared for, so they had to act in a different
Yeah.
way. And it's kind of like you're thinking as you're listening to it, oh, what would I do
Yeah.
here?
Mm,
And what we do in role playing games is we actually say, well, you're in this position. What do you
Yeah.
do? How do you deal with it? And we're actually
Yeah.
living it as we go.
so
So
good.
it's
Yeah.
funny because all the stories evolve, stories as people are telling them are from somebody telling someone about their experience and sharing it of something that they've
Mm,
seen or something they've gone through. But what we're doing is we're actually generating that because we
Yeah.
are so overlaid with stories today as well. And we don't
Yeah.
go out and hunt in the same way we normally do. How
Speak
do
for
we
yourself.
make,
What?
oh, well, I mean, it depends on who you are, I guess. I'm only speaking for me. But that idea of our, where do we get stories that resonate? And it doesn't have to be necessarily, funnily enough, we do role playing games, very much a lot of them deal with sword and sorcery, that are not things that you would see every day. And yet they are heroic, they are godly in some ways, they've got magic involved in it, and there's a human resonance with what's going on in here.
mm,
It's fascinating,
Yeah.
and which is why we do it, I think. But
mm.
Yeah, for sure.
before
Yeah,
I get taken off
and again, the
way,
lesson. Yeah, I'll just quickly.
Mm.
Last thing we'll touch on is again when you've got a tribe or a community, and you have the hunter party come back in. They're obviously saying, right, we'd planned for a usual thing at our usual hunting spot in that little channel there, and we were doing the usual things that's worked for us so many times. But this unexpected thing happened, and I love how you said that, Ian. But this is how we overcame it. So for
Yeah.
generations to come, that has held value. And I think that's why we've expanded and grown so beautifully as a society, because we keep telling these things that are important to us. They resonate with everyone who not necessarily experienced that. And as a collective and almost as a, I don't want to say the word hive mind, I hate it. Because it's so commonly used on like
Community.
Reddit and things. Yeah. But as a community of humans, we have obviously grown and learned from every experience, as my shirt so beautifully says. What we survived back in the day gave us experience and grew the community, not just the individual. So survival of the fittest, whatever. But you know, someone who wasn't necessarily capable with the wit and the know-how is going to go out hunting and going, oh, I better remember that there could be a lion at the top of this thing or hiding behind that
Yeah.
tree, because I know that that is a potential reality that could happen. And it's expanding our awareness of what could and couldn't be. And I love that role-playing games are exactly that. They are both what is happening and what could be happening, and it's all live and it's all improvised, and it's the story that just gets told at the end of the day.
And I
Yeah,
love the fact that
absolutely.
a whole other thing we can talk about down the line is about the fact that once you've learned from this, you gain experience, and
Yeah.
you actually, your story changes because of the experience you've had. You become
Yeah.
more aware, your story becomes more. And so the next time you play, it's not just from scratch. There's all this history, this lore, this world building that's happened. The Act One has been built into Act Two, etc.
Yeah.
So wanted to just briefly mention about Act One, Two, Three
Yeah.
structure as well, which is fascinating. You
Yeah.
could, I apply this actually to even for a session into scenes, because you can have it
Yeah.
literally as the scene that you've got your guys coming in to talk to.
Yeah.
This is a game I did recently, a duke who's very angry and feels like that they've duped her, and they need to somehow persuade her. They could be angry, they could be direct and say truth to power, or they could try to come from a compassionate point of view, or who knows. But the idea of coming at a scene from an three-act structure, I sometimes look at it as Act One is they come into a situation where the Duke is pissed and this is what she
Yeah.
wants. Act
Yeah.
Two is, okay, what are the different ways they can go? They could be this way, they could be angry, they could try to be
Yeah.
diplomatic, they could be try to be compassionate, they could whatever. And Act Three Well, the resolution, I don't know what that's going to be, but at least as a
Yeah.
That's
GM,
part of it.
we kind of, that's part of it. It's like we
Yeah.
prepare what we can for possible outcomes, but more than anything,
Mm.
it's just like, okay, roughly, if it goes positive, it's probably going to go this way. If it goes not so positive or negative, it'll probably go in
Yeah.
this direction, and just being ready for where it could go. All the
Mm.
curveballs and stuff then take it into other directions, which is what part of the fun is as well. So,
Yeah.
but you can also thinking just applying it
Yeah.
even to a scene can help it make it easy so that you don't
Yeah.
have to plan everything out either. So,
Yeah. And
um,
that's actually even
yeah,
it's a good cheat sheet. If you're thinking, what do I need to have happen? I need something to be set up. I need something to be a triggering event, a confrontation, a crisis, and I need that to have an outcome. I need that to lead somewhere else.
yeah,
And even that is like, because I know sometimes people get caught up and I don't really know how to get my players out of this. They've come in, they've talked to the person and I know they need to get here. But inserting that crisis point, that is always going to tip your characters and your players into action. If something goes wrong, if they need to fix, if as Jared was saying, they need to overcome, they're not going to spend hours at the shopping centre. They're going to need to do something. And I'm not saying rush your players or railroad them. Unless you're my players, you are not spending another 3 hours shopping for hats. But long story, I'm still scarred.
Great story.
But
different forms of role playing games. That's all.
But that's different things. But that's the thing. It's if you feel that the things are perhaps being stuck, having some kind of precipitating event will start to then move you along that kind of action and that tension up and down, which I think is as a DM, I think is a really useful trick to have up your sleeve. Or
And
on
that's
the
going to
table.
bring beautifully into what I was going to talk about next. So it's a link to the 3-act structure, as you alluded to before. So I'm very excited to talk about this. We'll put it in the chat for anyone out there if you want to have a look. We'll have an image of what is the hero's journey. It's actually like
There it
a
is.
map. It's a map.
Beautiful.
And the hero's journey itself is a version of the 3-act structure. So thank you for setting it up there, Thea, as well. And I'm glad we got a chance to talk a bit about it.
Yeah.
I've studied this as part of what I do, both in theatre, but also now applying it very much into role-playing games. So, but I just love this when it comes to stories. So before we even dive into this, I want you, Thea, and you, Jared, to think about a story I think you may already have that you really love, that's inspiring, that it has characters that you really love and you like how it ends up in particular, I think is an interesting thing. So the journey itself and how they get there.
Yeah.
Have a think of one. You can say it as well. Thea, do you have one in particular?
Let me think. I mean, I do. Let's be honest. I thought about it beforehand. The movie The Incredibles.
Fantastic.
Is a lovely movie. When you have a comfort film.
Oh my God, yes.
I've had a crappy day and I want to watch something that's feel good. The Incredibles is one of my go-to films.
I have utter fond memories of it. And like when I was quite young, I had some neighbors as well down the street, and I just as soon as anyone mentions that movie, I just remember going to their house and meeting some lovely people my age, and what we decided to do was watch The Incredibles, and it was just great.
It is.
It's
It's that kind of warm movie.
Yeah, so good.
And I like it because it's a great story as well.
Truly. Yeah.
Brad Bird, director, writer, fantastic. That's
fantastic.
another topic for another day. Awesome. So The Incredibles, cool. Jared, how about yourself?
For me, it has to be Hook, the amazing twist on the Peter Pan story. I do love Peter Pan as an overall classic story. As an individual in a different world who has an idea of how things should and shouldn't be, and is just a little bit whimsical and a little bit funny. But the twist on Hook being Peter being an adult, he's come back from Neverland to the real world. He's got kids, but he has unfinished business, and his kids are kidnapped, and he has to make his way back to Neverland in order to face his old demons and challenges. And of course, the classic Dustin Hoffman as Hook, utterly remarkable. Brilliant. And the Lost Boys and everything about that film is just perfect for me.
Absolutely.
These are good. The fact they got resonance for you both, I think, is awesome as well, because it's like things like this that but it's interesting if there's things that you've watched for many, many times and you keep coming back to them, then you still find them inspiring in some way. So there must be something beyond the initial watch, that there's something you're still getting out of it. Thank you for that. And this is for you guys in chat as well. Have a think about a story you really love, whether it's a film or a novel or any form, just something that you really love. And I'm going to talk about the hero's journey. It's similar to a 3-act structure, in fact, and it was something that came about from a guy named Joseph Campbell 100 years ago, around the time that psychoanalysis was starting. There was another person, though, another psychiatrist or psychologist, sorry, named Carl Jung, who was amazing. A whole other topic for another day. He talked about
heard of him.
story archetypes, and Joseph Campbell took that further. He started studying cultures around the world and started to find out that there was this idea of a collective unconscious that Carl Jung took up, about these archetypes that continue to resonate through different cultures, but they're very similar in the human experience. There's a human story that unites us all. And after studying hundreds of cultures around belief systems of indigenous cultures and many other forms of communities around the world, came up with the hero's journey. And if you have a look at the image, I'm going to walk it through as a very quick crash course, but I want you to think of your story as I talk it through. And it starts off at the top with the picture of our hero, who is an ordinary person, just this person at the beginning of their journey, and they're in the normal world. And you can consider this as kind of the beginning of Act 1. That they have a world where not everything's right, but this is how it is. And there's some point at the first part of their story, in this introduction of Act 1, there's a call to adventure. Something happens where they feel the need for change. They need to make change in the world, or change themselves, or maybe both. And there's a point where they may meet a mentor along the way who gives them ideas about how change could happen. And the tough thing about this is, in the Act 1, of course, they could refuse that call. So they have the option of being able to go out there and make it happen, but it's too hard, or it's like there's too much you've got to do in your ordinary life, in the ordinary world, and they're not really ready. But there will come a moment, otherwise there wouldn't be a story. If it just stayed like that, that would be our ordinary lives of this is how the world is, and if we do nothing, nothing will change.
Jumping in, that would be quite funny though. This would be all about the person's like, oh, this portal opens. No, thank you.
Not today. Thank you. Goodbye.
Not today.
Go home, read a book, and have a cup of tea.
That's Bilbo at the beginning of The Hobbit. Absolutely. He's like, no, I'm good. Get his pipe and he's all ready to go.
Goodbye.
But something will happen. There is an inciting incident. Now, I love that term as well, the inciting incident. And I know that from film theory as well. Something happens where they cross the threshold and they have to leave, and they are driven to go out and go on this journey for change. So they go from the normal world into Act 2, into the unknown. And in the unknown, a number of things can happen. Like you're saying, Thea, about the 3-act structure, things get thrown at them. Like just sometimes it might seem at random, but it actually, you will have there are certain common elements that keep coming up. They may find helpers along the way who can help them on their journey. They may be trying to get the change happening and it fails. And so do they give up, or do they try again? Maybe with the help of the helper. They get back up again and get on their feet and keep going. Whatever it is, it's going back and forth, trying, failing, little successes here and there. And then they slowly start to grow until there's a point where they go into, some people call it going into the underworld, going into the dark forest, going into the cave, going into the place they fear to go.
To me, it's stepping into the void.
Yeah. Stepping into the void, beyond the unknown. It's that place that's deep in the unknown that is beyond what you're in control of, but you have to face it.
I love putting it that way.
It's where they lose the familiar.
Beautiful.
And you have to let go of the familiar in some way as well. Everything that you know You have to kind of put behind you. This is in some later texts in developing the hero's journey. Some people call it facing the mirror, which is seeing something that it's almost exactly like the protagonist, our hero, but is looking at the world in a very different way and is going down a path that the hero does not agree with. And it might be something they have to challenge themselves. If I continue this way, the world will continue looking like this. And there can be a form of death. And death doesn't need to be physical. It doesn't need to be the literal sense, but it's a sense of letting go, the sense of giving away old ideas about how they see themselves, about the way they do things. And they get reborn, hopefully, to look at the world differently, to see themselves differently, to act differently in the world. Revelations start to appear as they realize this, and there's an awareness. I think that's a key point when it comes to towards the end of Act 2. There is an awareness of what needs to happen, and atonement can sometimes come in here, which is that idea of being able to see their own faults, see the things that they may have done less well, and saying, I own that. That was me, and I'll make up for that.
I live my life by that, which I'm actually kind of getting emotional now as you're talking about it, because I've been going through a huge transformation myself recently, and this is just hitting home so hard. So I love that, because I speak about responsibility. Which doesn't mean that you're necessarily to blame for something, but you do need to take on and own some things, and that is going to be something that is your fault, and there are things that aren't. And atonement can be the letting, the acknowledging and the accepting of flaws, and I love that.
And it's hard. It's a vulnerable point. But it's interesting, I think, that in so many stories, especially the ones that resonate for us, like you're talking about, is becoming aware of it and just accepting. And it's sometimes okay to go, okay, I'm in pain, and I can't heal a wound until I realize there's a wound in the first place. And so, all right, that's what it is. I need to work at that. I need to step up. And as you head into Act 3, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that part of the reason that the hero's journey works so well is it is so universal to human experience. And I think that, and I'll talk more about this later. I won't cut the hero's journey short. That would make me the villain. But I think that's... So I think that, that is why, when we talk about this, it can actually hit home so much, because it's our journey. It's a human, maybe that's another word for it. And maybe I'm sure academics far smarter than me have done this, have made it the human journey, not just the hero's journey. But maybe we aspire to that, and we want to get there.
I think that's it. It's like, I mean, I'm not sure what I think it's an interesting word to use, the hero's journey, as well, to take you away from the sense of the physicality of what we are, but it's something that we're kind of aspiring to, I think, maybe. But coming to Act 3, that whole idea of, now that you've gone through this, the hero's seen and done and failed and learned and died and been reborn and let go and seen and become aware and atoned for things, they start to return and they come back. And they see the world differently. They act in the world differently. They have a chance to change things in the world differently. And they also are seen to be changed themselves. So the normal world is no longer the normal world, even though they are in it and it seems to be normal. They know. They're aware. They've become something new. The world has changed because of that forever. And that's where the story ends or continues on to the next phase. I think that's it, as it wraps up the denouement, the wrapping up, the tying up of letting go of things, of handing over and returning and saying, okay, this is who I am now, this is where it is, and this is what I do.
That crisis resolution, and whether it is the world is ending and we have now saved it, or whether it is I have had to change who I am as a person, and I am now at peace with that, and I can continue to then look outward as a hero, as a character.
And it is. No, go ahead.
I was going to say it is circular. I've just lost the word.
It's repetitive. It's this loop. It's this cyclical is what we really want.
Yes, I wouldn't say repetitive. I would
It's
say
Yeah,
kind of like
it's
actually,
cyclical
yeah.
because it changes and evolves and it changes depending on context and the person and the
yeah,
And I think
timing.
Ian was going to say that
Yeah,
like a
we're also
spiral.
excited.
I was going to say like
Yeah.
a spiral rather than a circle
Mm-hmm.
because it doesn't go back to the same place. It
absolutely.
goes to another level,
That's
to
it. And
somewhere
it
new.
goes
So you've
one you
returned,
travel
but you see it
upwards
differently.
very
Yeah,
slightly, but where you've gone
yeah,
Yeah.
around the helix and around the spiral
Yeah.
takes you
yeah.
one level up. And again,
I
Mm.
love the way the imagery of that.
I just love this
I was
shirt
going to say
so
the imagery of
much.
that is you have come back to where you started, but you have risen
But you see
above
it.
Exactly,
who you
exactly.
were.
You've come
Nearly.
back to the point
Yeah.
of either centeredness or what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of continuity and understanding of normality and regularity. Because there currently isn't necessarily a call to adventure, but we are a different person walking the same path. And I love the saying that the man who enters the flowing river, I'm going to butcher this, the man who enters the flowing river does not exit the river. For the man who walks out of the river is not the same man, nor is the river he walked from. And that
The
is
same river.
effectively to say that when you step into a river, there's flowing water, and the water that touches your ankles or your feet or your body is miles downward down the flow. And you
Downstream.
yourself have also gained knowledge and insight because you've also could have seen or heard or just even internally thought and accepted, much like I did with my cold swim this evening. I went from being in a state of amped up anxiety from the day's work to transitioning to the person that you're seeing before you who is excited to be with family and friends. It's a different modality. It's a different way of, it's a different mentality and a different way of thinking. And I needed something to reset me. So when you step out of that flowing river, you've changed because time has lapsed and time is the ever present thing across all of these things we're talking about. Things need to happen at different times and they need to be separated so that we can absorb, acknowledge, change, and layer on these things that take us upwards through the spiral.
But I would add that you did something there as well. It wasn't just time that moved. It's because of that man's choice to act
Yes.
by going into the river that brought the change about for him to be able to come out. If he hadn't entered, there would have been no story there, which is so much about our choices and our actions, which is what it leads to role-playing games in particular. These
I
are
was going to
living
say
stories.
all of this
I was
comes
gonna
down to
ask.
choice, and that's what we have as humans.
Yeah, which 100% is so important. But I'm really curious about this hero's journey. Ian, how do you apply that in your games, to your character developments, to your,
So glad you asked, and let's see how I can do this in a short time or not. We'll see how we go. Well,
Let's
look,
go.
the thing about it is, first of all, I resonate with both of you because, Jared, when you're saying you're getting emotional about this, I completely agree. There are moments because as soon as you start hearing this, there's very familiar things, the human story here that we connect to. I think about this sometimes and automatically I may be thinking of something that's happened during the day, or I may be thinking about somebody I know or some relationship that I have, and I start applying that to it because they're so similar in so many ways, or even just how you look at yourself. And it can be, I think it's so important of the compassionate nature, the empathic nature of what role-playing games can do is because we are living the story here in Journey and we are getting to make those choices, but we're not doing it alone. We get to do this with others. So the way I look at the hero's journey in the game is that the players are the heroes of the journey. That we talk about this is probably kicking off for other topics in future, but the idea that me as a games master, my whole the ideas and stories I've got, I do have overarching stories of what's going on, but it's more kind of what's the word? Almost philosophical about okay, the world. It's if you're playing in Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm going to talk about that specifically, it's a game where you have characters who go from level 1 to level 20. And that means they go through a journey of experiences, etc., to get to a place where they're basically almost godlike, but it's also they have massive effects on the world or multiverse even. And that's at the heart of my idea. If I'm playing a game that is a campaign, I'm not going to talk about one-shots because I just want to talk about this as a thing. One-shots,
100%.
much easier. But the idea of that journey means that the players, for me, the world is going to change. What journey that will go on, I'm not sure. But the players are the heart of it. They are the heroes of this journey.
Mm.
And I have been a player and I know what they're going through. So I know I need to invest. This story is about their growth. Where do they come from? What is it that's a challenge for them? And I'm going, okay, you said you've got this guy who's, I try not to draw on other characters as well that other people are playing. I'm trying to think of one as well. Okay, you've got, let's say it's Bilbo Baggins, right?
Yeah.
You've got this guy who's at home, comfortable, everything, likes it very well, and has a friend named Gandalf who's really weird, but he has some dwarf friends, etc. Anyway, and really, I don't really want to adventure. I'd be interested in maybe like doing things, but I don't want to leave this place. And it's like, okay, so the number one thing that has to happen for you is you have to leave that place. There has to be something that pulls you out of that place to go over here. So whatever I'm doing, when I'm looking at the different players, whether it's a paladin who's got a dark past that he's trying to atone for, or whether it's a bard who's kind of like a bit of a rogue sort of thing, but he's trying to do good, or whereas someone who's just lived a very simple life and wants to see the world and adventure, I need to then throw things at them that completely turn around their idea of the world. So that if it's someone who's just out there looking for adventure to see how the world is, it's like, I need to know the players are also on that journey. What level of journey do they want to go on? Like what level of grit, if you want to call it? Is this like,
yes,
not everyone wants a Game of Thrones kind of game, and I don't want to run a Game of Thrones kind of game. I feel like a bit more heroic fantasy is where I'm at, which is Dungeons and Dragons at its core, from Lord of the Rings, all that kind of thing. So there's that sense of heroism, but they want challenge. And I go, whatever the group is and whatever their level of their challenge they have, then it's like, okay, that's what, then if you want someone who wants to really be a hero and, you know, be seen as this wonderful person, it's like, you're going to see some of the harder things in life. You're going to see some of these things, and how do you deal with it? Because not all things are wine and roses, you know, some things are really tough. And how did that person get to the hero that you look up to, you know, this person there, how did they get to that point? They went through crap and they made hard choices at times. And I swear that, not everyone learns from being told. They learn from experience.
and
they learn
not from the
doing
first
it
time either.
Not from the first time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because I'm thinking about some of the characters' arcs in some of the games that I'm running and have been running for a while. So the connected one-shots. And I think it's interesting that you talk about, you know, what did the player want out of their character's journey? What did they want for their hero's journey? Because it doesn't necessarily have to be that's what's happening in the game. It could be they started their hero's journey in their backstory and you're never going to play any of that. But elements of that hero's journey, elements of that tragedy, or let's be honest, it's usually a tragic backstory.
So many tragic backstories.
But elements of that are going to start to come in. They might find that they're starting to do the atonement. I'm thinking of an example, and I'll go back to the story arc I spoke about where you had a number of party members in peril and a particular character was offered a choice that they could save people, but they were going to end up with a level of warlock. It's not exactly what I said in the story, but they had to make a deal to save their characters. Now, this was a player who was very open to different types of story, but because of the backstory, there was a very clear, they needed something resolved. There was something missing for their hero's journey. And this was it. This was that sacrifice. This was that walking into the void, is they had to face that choice. And I'm even thinking way back, I don't know if Jared, you remember this game years ago now, where your character was a cleric. I think it was a cleric. And
I play a lot of clerics.
suddenly faced with a god. I know, you do too. But your character was faced with another deity and had to make a choice to go with that deity and trust them. And again, that was a one-shot, but it came out of some of that even brief backstory. So I think something that this is like having an idea of hero's journey and that you can use that gives you an avenue to leverage elements from your players' backstories. from character,
Yeah.
even if they are very brief. You know, I grew up in a happy family home. I left that happy home because I was looking for something else. That something else gives you that chink to step into the void.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it doesn't
Absolutely
even have to
amazing.
be detailed. I like that it's just a little snippet of something
Yeah.
that they've put in there that it's like, even just asking that question. That's why I think it's so good having that kind of session zero sort of idea of just being able to say, oh, I don't know, you know, some people who want to play this, it's like, well, if you're going to play it, then we're going to challenge it. So it's like, I've got a character who, you know, just wants to see what's out there. And I was like, yeah, any reason that you want to leave home to go off and do this? Why on earth are you leaving if everything's okay? Oh, well, actually, I wouldn't mind actually going to, I want to go across the seas and, you know, see different places. And it's like, okay, that's something I can work with and I can see.
We can do
okay.
travel. We can do exotic locations. We can interesting people, interesting cultures.
We can tempt you with that wanting to know. Your curiosity is your weakness.
Well, that's it. That's it as well as
your vulnerability.
Act 1.
It is your
vulnerability, and it's something because, and I think that's the interesting thing because you also want to make sure that you're treating players well. You don't want to, you know, traumatize people when you're throwing challenges, and that's something that's another discussion about that kind of the idea of having really good understanding of people's boundaries of what's something that they want to engage with. But that idea of when you know that, then it's like, okay, this is your vulnerability. Well, let's test that. Let's have a look at you're interested in this. What are the limits of this? Where is it that why do you want to become a hero on a journey? That's what Dungeons and Dragons games are about, is facing massive challenges to grow an experience and change yourself, change the world, change with the people around you. Who knows? And so it's I think it's a really handy, useful thing. And I think having that, I think, can be really useful. That's all.
100%. I think it's a fantastic tool. And something else, like we talked about, that kind of story structure, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, it's also, I feel that it's something that you don't have to use consciously. It's even having just that understanding that there needs to be character growth helps provide the environment that your player characters can do that in. That's the way of putting it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely this override, like we've touched on it quite a few times. Hero's journey, 3-act structure. They're going to be these frameworks that you can keep in mind and understand. And obviously, having listened to this, you completely understand and have a firm grasp of.
Because we explain it amazingly well.
So eloquently and clearly that you have a firm grasp of the concept. Hopefully that is actually what we have tried to achieve here, is just kind of shed some light on some concepts and structures that clearly, from what we've talked about, have resonated not only with us as individuals but also as our experiences with different stories, and just we keep coming back to the uniqueness that is a role-playing game, which is not just one individual telling a collective. It is the collective telling a very personal story in the moment as it's happening, improvised, live. And there's this raw sort of vulnerability that we are constantly exposing every time we play role-playing games. Because I played, again, Forever DM, I played last night and I came into it going, I have a character sheet. I sort of know what I'm doing, and I'm playing with a bunch of people I've never met before. So I feel like I'd been playing role-playing games for the first time. So just in the fact that I was jumping on, willing to, because of my motivation for the desire to raise money for charity, let's be perfectly blunt. But I had the absolute pleasure of doing that in an environment where I knew I was safe. I was stepping into the void, into the unknown, and playing with people I didn't know, with a character I'd created 24 hours earlier, to have an incredible story and just a wonderful experience. And I didn't know what was going to happen, and I've stepped away from it going, right, I'm a little bit more confident as myself as a role player. I didn't know how well I did, but I got validation from that. I got to check in and acknowledge from these people around me that what I did was actually enjoyable and fun and valuable. So we also get to share these stories and structures so that we can kind of say to people, hey, like, I did this thing, it might not be that significant, but let's say that the hunter-gatherers went out, and then meanwhile at home, everyone else was creating art, because not only have the hunter-gatherers done such an amazing job and fulfilled their role as per a role-playing game, we could say, in a team of companions on an epic quest, there's also going to be people at home who would have been like, well, I took this piece of leather and I put it over this thing and it makes this really cool sound. We could use that at the fire dance tonight. It doesn't matter what your story is. It doesn't matter where your journey is. And it doesn't matter what cool thing you overcome. You did something that wasn't quite the norm. It wasn't quite expected. And at the end of the day, you decided, all right, my challenge is, right, I've decided that I don't want this normal thing. And I know that we're going a little bit over time, but I kind of have to touch on addiction because I feel it kind of ties a little bit into addiction, which is I truly believe that the greatest addiction is comfort. And I find it so bizarre that we play this hobby, which is all about doing these crazy, wild things because it's a safe, curated environment where we can go out and execute these things. And because it's such a personal thing where we're telling a story about our characters and who we are, and we're saying that this is happening, this is what I do, this is what we do, it stays in those memories. And I don't think anyone is ever going to argue that once someone has gone through an entire campaign of role-playing games, that they aren't a better person for it in some degree or another, that they haven't mentally checked in to themselves and gone, man, I feel proud of what I've achieved. Even though we've just said words and rolled dice and written numbers down, there's a central core pride, and I think we just keep coming back to the human experience, that at the end of the day, it's just valuable.
Achievement.
No matter what. It is achievement, it's overcoming, and
it is just
pride.
as it is a real valid experience. I don't need to physically slay the dragon and get covered in all the ick, which definitely is not going to come out with dry cleaning, because to have that sense of accomplishment. And I think that's a beautiful place to kind of wrap up. And,
Absolutely.
I mean, we could talk about this all evening.
We could keep diving into
it. We could
it.
go for hours.
I think we've really summarized it so beautifully.
Yeah. So it's been great.
More conversation next time. And if you guys do want to hear more about it, please let us know. Because, of course, we can dive into, I mean, we've gone from very broad topics of world building last week to story. Like, again, we are just constantly talking about storytelling at the end of the day. And I love that we actually kind of have nuanced and kind of establish some kind of a core structure and what just does work, has worked, will work. And, you know, you don't have to stick to, but there is this guidance that is available if you want to do it in your role-playing games.
Speaking of guidance and plans, what's up next?
What's up
What
next?
are we doing next? What's
next
our
week,
plan?
Again, just like last week where you decided to throw up my arm, we are 100% absolutely totally doing something next Thursday night as per usual, but in the meantime, it's going to be a cozy stream.
We have a thing. We're doing a thing, guys. We have a plan.
We got a plan.
Don't say we have no plan. There's a plan. What's the plan, Ian?
What is the plan? Well, actually, I'll introduce it because it's actually not going to be me running it. It'll be Jared this Sunday. We're doing another cozy crafting session, and Jared will be map making. Jared, what do you plan to do? Because it's one of our big ones, like we did our AI game a couple of weeks ago. This is a 3-hour stint to dive right into map making for any of you out there. Or thereabouts.
Yeah. We're going to aim 3 hours.
What are we doing?
Well, I almost wish things were a little bit mixed around because the Saturday before the Sunday, I'm going to be live streaming on Jasper's Game Day to raise money for Jasper's Game Day and suicide awareness. Touch on that at the start of the stream. So if you are around Saturday 20th coming up, please tune in. Please donate. Please come hang out. It's going to be wild. I almost wish the map making stream was before that because I'm going to have to make a bunch of maps for my live stream because I cannot not have a map for virtual tabletops, even though the Theatre of the Mind last night was fun. But we're going to make a map. And I would actually really implore and encourage everyone to come and tune in because I want to make what the community wants to see. I want you guys to bring me your collective ideas and I put it down on a digital canvas. We can use a variety of role-playing map-making softwares. I'm currently obsessed with Dungeon Alchemist, which is this 3D asset environment that you can create a tabletop sort of perspective with and other things, but Dungeon Draft is really where I have a lot of assets. So if we wanted to like dive into the nitty gritty, I have lots and lots of assets from lots of beautiful creators on Patreon and things. So I think we might start with that. As cool as Dungeon Alchemist is,
works on PC and on Mac, which can be a limitation on some of this software and some of these sites that you use.
So not
Yep.
plugging anything specific. I mean, there's absolutely
We're
amazing
not
tools out
sponsored,
there.
but if you want to
Incarnate.
sponsor us,
I'll just start ringing off all of these map making things I know, but I will be specifically using Dungeon Draft because, again, I like creative control and restrictions. So I feel like sticking to one medium and having that single perspective. We're going to get really creative with the layering and things like that. But I will just show you my methods and my methodology, and I want you guys to come and help me curate something really cool. I think Ian's going to be hanging out with me, which would be really cool. It would be fun.
Hell yeah.
So at a minimum,
I love maps.
yeah,
As
at
you
a
can
minimum,
tell, I love
we're going to do that.
Oh, so I can't wait.
nice.
It's going to be fun.
There will be new
Awesome.
episodes coming up on YouTube soon.
Soon.
That's on me. They're
And
coming.
then, yep, it'll be there.
And if you're watching this as part of the cult in 2,000 years' time, you can access those. I'm sure they're part of your teachings.
They will be in the archive, yes. And
yeah.
of course, our core tenets upon the
In the
walls of the
archive.
chapel.
Yeah.
Don't let role players run away with the idea of a cult. We'll do it.
Set them up.
But yeah, absolutely check us out on Discord, Facebook, and all those other good things. Yeah. Tonight, I think we should really truly raid Jasper's game day because these guys are going to be about 40 minutes
100%.
into their evening game, which is going to be super fun. So we're going to do that. But in the
Set
meantime,
up, ready to go.
thank you.
And just as a reminder, what is
Yes.
Jasper raising funds and awareness for?
I have to really touch into it because it's such a cool thing. So for the last 3 years,
big thing.
I have been involved with Jasper's Game Week Aussie edition. Blessed to be invited to be a part of that as a content creator for the Australian role playing community. There are a bunch of amazing content creators who have all been invited, organized by Meeples and Dragons on their Twitch. They have an online retail store and their own merchandise, such as roleplay glasses. So they have these beautiful themed glasses that have smoked sort of classes and things, role-playing classes. Very, very cool. So go check them out. They're really amazing. They have been organizing this for the last 3 years. It hasn't necessarily been streamed on their channel, so go check them out and support them. But Jasper's Game Week is all about raising money for suicide awareness. As someone who has unfortunately been so close with some people who have decided to make that unfortunate decision and have felt that their unfortunate journey has come to an end. We just want to make sure that everybody is with us along these heroes' journeys, along these stories, because at the end of the day, we want everyone's human experience to be the best it can be. And that's not to say that anyone's choice is the wrong choice. But of course, we want to give everyone the best chance they can to keep living these amazing lives that we are blessed with. So please go and support that. It's absolutely a good cause. If there's one charity I encourage people to check out, it's that. And I want to say who we're supporting in Australia. I'm going to have it here in just a second because I'm going to pull up the screen. Black Dog Institute. Thank you. Black Dog Institute is who we are supporting in Australia because that is our local organization who is going to reach out to our community. But please, in any way, shape, or form, the least you guys can do is just check in with your friends and say, are you okay? We have Are You Okay day as well, but I just want everyone to reach out. And because we started the stream with me saying to my lovely co-host that I've had a devastating week, a lot of crazy things have happened, but I wouldn't miss this for the world. So these are, some of the reasons that I keep peace. I say that in such a tragic way, but let's just be honest. There's certain things in life that we look forward to, and this stream is one of them. So thank you so much for joining me, guys.
We know you love you.
Absolutely. And thank you to the community, everyone who's listening, everyone's tuning in.
Thank you, everyone out there.
Yeah, we do this for you guys at the end of the day. We absolutely love you. We absolutely appreciate you. And we honestly, the whole reason we do this is because we just want to share our stories and our message. So yeah, thank you to everyone who's continuing to support us with the ongoing conversation and all of these uncharted values. I love that you put that in my little prompt to there, Ian. Exactly that. Help us help you step into the void of role.
Oh, that's gorgeous. All right.
Awesome.
I think
love
we
you guys.
need to wrap on that. That is perfect. All right. Love you all.
Thank you so much.
We're going to raid out to Meeple's Dragons.
Yes.
Mwah.
Yes.
Love you.
Thank you, everyone. Make sure you tune in. Make sure you donate
you
because
all.
guess what? You can donate
Love you
and mess
both.
with people's games. Why would you do that? Why?
Woo. This
Cool.
is great.
Donate.
Shall we roll credits?
It's an awesome cause.
Roll credits. We love you.
Credits.
Bye-bye.
Bye.